The millionaire always ate breakfast alone at the bakery. Every morning, like clockwork, he arrived just as the city of Chicago was awakening, slipped into the same corner seat bathed in dim morning light, and ordered the same black coffee and plain toast. But that morning was different. A little girl approached him and asked a question that left him frozen. "I don't know where you're listening from. Maybe you're staring at a faded photograph or nursing a memory that aches like a wound. It doesn't matter what time it is or what season you find yourself in. But I promise you, today's story will touch your soul." James Delaney had built his empire from nothing, transforming a small investment portfolio into a multi-billion-dollar fortune that sprawled across Chicago's financial district like a concrete cathedral. His penthouse overlooked Lake Michigan, where the morning sun cast golden reflections that danced across windows he never opened. The silence in his home was profound, broken only by the distant hum of traffic 40 floors below and the gentle whir of climate control systems that kept his world at a perfect 72 degrees. In the heart of his marble-floored mansion, time had indeed stopped. Grandfather clocks, antiques worth more than most people's homes, stood frozen at 8:15 in the morning, the precise moment his wife Sarah had walked out with their daughter Emma, taking with them the only warmth his wealth had ever known. The photographs lining his mahogany shelves showed glimpses of happier times: birthday parties with chocolate-stained smiles, Christmas mornings with wrapping paper scattered like confetti, family vacations where laughter echoed louder than the waves. But behind the protective glass of expensive frames, those memories felt more like museum pieces than lived experiences. James would sometimes catch himself staring at them during his sleepless nights, wondering if that smiling man in the pictures had ever been real, or if he had always been this hollow shell wrapped in Italian suits and Swiss watches. His fortune, built through careful investments in tech stocks, cryptocurrency portfolios that included substantial Bitcoin holdings, and real estate assets across 3 states, sat in accounts that generated more interest in a single day than most families saw in a year. Yet every dollar felt meaningless, every dividend payment another reminder that money could buy everything except the one thing he desperately needed: redemption. The mornings were the hardest. In those quiet hours before his assistant called with market updates and merger proposals, James would stand at his floor-to-ceiling windows, watching Chicago wake up below him. Office workers hurried along Michigan Avenue with coffee cups warming their hands. Couples shared newspapers at outdoor cafes. Parents walked children to school with backpacks bouncing against small shoulders. From his height, they looked like tiny figures in a snow globe, a perfect world he could observe but never touch. That's how he had discovered the small bakery on Elm Street, tucked between a used bookstore and a flower shop that changed ownership every few years. He had been driving aimlessly one morning, unable to face another breakfast alone in his echoing dining room, when the warm glow of the bakery's windows drew him like a beacon. The place was nothing special. Mismatched chairs, checkered tablecloths that had seen better days, and walls painted a cheerful yellow that reminded him of Sarah's favorite sundress. But it smelled like home, like the kitchen of his childhood, where his grandmother would roll out pie dough while humming old Irish ballads. Like Saturday mornings before his life became about profit margins and board meetings and the relentless pursuit of more. The owner, a tired-looking woman named Rosa, never asked questions when the well-dressed man in the expensive car began showing up every morning at exactly 7:30. She simply poured his black coffee, toasted his bread, and let him sit in the corner booth where the morning light fell just right. For 3 years, this had been James's ritual, his one concession to normalcy in a life that had become as cold and calculated as a balance sheet. He would read the Wall Street Journal, check his phone for overnight market movements, and carefully avoid making eye contact with the families who laughed and chattered at nearby tables. He was there, but not really there, a ghost haunting the edges of other people's happiness, sustained by the illusion that proximity to warmth might somehow thaw the ice around his heart. The bakery became his sanctuary, not because it offered comfort, but because it offered anonymity. Here, among the retired teachers sharing gossip and the construction workers grabbing quick breakfasts, he was just another customer. No one knew about his penthouse or his portfolio, or the empire that bore his name. No one knew that the quiet man in the corner booth controlled assets worth more than the GDP of small countries, or that his signature could make or break careers across the financial industry. But on that particular Tuesday morning in October, as autumn painted Chicago in shades of gold and crimson, something shifted in the careful balance of his solitude. The air outside carried the scent of burning leaves and the distant sound of children's laughter from the nearby elementary school. Inside the bakery, Rosa was humming while she arranged pastries in the display case, and the coffee machine hissed its familiar morning song. James sat in his usual spot. The Wall Street Journal spread before him like armor, when he became aware of someone watching him. The feeling started as a gentle tickle at the edge of his consciousness, the way you might notice a bird perched outside your window. When he finally looked up, he saw her, a little girl no more than 8 years old, standing beside his table with a patience that seemed impossible for someone her age. She had dark hair that curled rebelliously despite obvious attempts to tame it, and eyes that held depths of understanding that made James profoundly uncomfortable. Her clothes were clean but worn, a faded pink sweater with a small hole near the left elbow, jeans that had been carefully patched at the knees, and sneakers that had walked many miles. But there was something luminous about her, something that made the artificial light of the bakery seem suddenly warmer. When she spoke, her voice was clear and direct, cutting through his defenses like sunshine through morning fog. "Excuse me, sir," she said politely, "but I've seen you here every morning for weeks, and I was wondering, why do you always eat alone?" The question hit James like a physical blow. His coffee cup froze halfway to his lips, and for a moment, the familiar sounds of the bakery faded into silence. Why did he eat alone? The simple, innocent inquiry exposed the elaborate architecture of his isolation, revealing it for what it truly was, a choice he made every morning, every meal, every day of his carefully constructed exile. He stared at the child, this small stranger who had somehow seen through the expensive suit and perfect posture to the loneliness beneath. Her question hung in the air between them, unanswered and unanswerable, while something deep inside his chest began to crack like ice under spring sun. He began, then stopped, realizing he had no idea how to explain his life to someone who still believed the world held magic. The little girl waited patiently, her head tilted slightly to one side, and James felt exposed in a way that no boardroom battle or hostile takeover had ever made him feel. Here was innocence in its purest form, asking the one question he had spent years avoiding, and he found himself completely unprepared for the magnitude of its simplicity. In that moment, surrounded by the warm sense of fresh bread and the gentle chatter of morning customers, James Delaney, master of the universe, captain of industry, owner of an empire, discovered that he had no answer for a little girl who wanted to know why he was sad. Sarah had left on a Thursday morning in March, taking with her not just their 7-year-old daughter Emma, but every trace of warmth that had ever existed in their magnificent home. The argument had been building for months, years really, like storm clouds gathering on a horizon neither of them wanted to acknowledge. It wasn't about money, though money had certainly been part of it. It was about presence, about priorities, about the way success can become a prison that locks out everything that makes success worthwhile. James had been working on a merger that would have increased his net worth by 40%, a deal involving tech companies and cryptocurrency investments that had consumed every waking hour for 6 months. When Emma's school called to say she had been in the nurse's office asking for her daddy because she didn't feel well, it was Sarah who left her own job to pick her up. When parent-teacher conferences needed attending, board meetings somehow always took priority. When Emma's first loose tooth fell out during dinner, James was on a conference call with investors in Tokyo, pacing his study while his daughter held the tiny pearl of enamel in her palm like a treasure. "You're disappearing," Sarah had said that final morning, standing in their bedroom doorway with 2 suitcases and a resolve that cut through his distraction like a blade. "Emma doesn't even ask for you anymore when she's scared. Do you know what she told me yesterday? She said maybe Daddy doesn't live here anymore. Maybe he just visits sometimes. The words had hit him like a market crash, sudden and devastating. But instead of fighting for them, instead of dropping everything and proving that his family mattered more than his fortune, James had retreated behind the only defense he knew: work. Within hours of Sarah's departure, he was buried in financial statements and acquisition reports, telling himself that the hollow ache in his chest was just the temporary discomfort of a necessary business decision. The divorce papers had been signed with the same mechanical precision he brought to every contract. Sarah kept the house in Lincoln Park, the one with Emma's height marks penciled on the kitchen door frame and the garden where they had planted sunflowers together. James kept the penthouse, the investment portfolio, and the suffocating silence that wealth can buy. In the 3 years since, he had seen Emma exactly 14 times, awkward Saturday afternoons in restaurants where they sat across from each other like strangers, making conversation about school and friends while the space between them filled with everything he didn't know how to say. She was 10 now, losing the round-cheeked sweetness of early childhood, growing into a person he barely recognized. Her laugh was different, more reserved. Her hugs were brief and careful, as if she was afraid he might disappear again if she held on too tightly. The last time they had been together, just 6 weeks ago, Emma had shown him a drawing she had made of their family. In the crayon portrait, Sarah and Emma stood close together under a bright yellow sun, holding hands and smiling. James was drawn separately on the far side of the paper, surrounded by tall buildings that looked like the Chicago skyline. When he asked her about it, Emma had simply said, "That's where you live, Daddy. Up high where you can see everything." Out of the mouths of babes came truths that cut deeper than any business rival ever could. His penthouse had become a monument to his choices, beautiful, expensive, and completely hollow. The refrigerator was always full, but he rarely ate at home. The entertainment system cost more than most people's cars, but played only silence. The master bedroom, with its California king bed and Egyptian cotton sheets, felt as vast and empty as an Arctic tundra. Every morning he would wake before dawn and stand in his walk-in closet, selecting another perfectly tailored suit like armor for another day of battle. His reflection in the mirror showed a man who had everything money could buy: a physique maintained by a private trainer, teeth whitened by the best cosmetic dentists, hair styled by professionals who charged more per hour than most people made in a week. But his eyes showed the truth. They were the eyes of a man who had traded his soul for stock options and discovered too late that it wasn't a fair exchange. The irony wasn't lost on him that his greatest business success had come after his personal life imploded. The merger he had been working on when Sarah left had indeed made him substantially richer, opening doors to investment opportunities that seemed to multiply his wealth by equations he barely understood himself. Bitcoin portfolios, international real estate, technology stocks that split and multiplied like digital rabbits. Every financial move he made turned to gold. Forbes magazine had featured him on their cover last year, calling him the Golden Touch. How James Delaney turned heartbreak into billions. The article praised his laser focus, his unwavering dedication to success, his ability to make decisions without emotional interference. They had no idea they were describing a man who had simply stopped feeling anything at all. But the bakery was different. Here, among the mismatched furniture and cheerful chaos, James could pretend for an hour each morning that he was just another person trying to find a quiet moment before the day began. Here, he could sit with his black coffee and whole wheat toast and listen to other people's conversations about little league games and grocery lists and weekend plans that didn't require SEC filings or board approval. Here, on this October morning, a little girl had appeared beside his table like a messenger from a world he had forgotten existed, asking questions that made his carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. Her name, he learned, was Luna, a name that seemed to capture perfectly the gentle light she carried with her wherever she went. She was 8 years old and lived with her mother, Maria, in a small apartment 6 blocks from the bakery, in a neighborhood where children still played hopscotch on sidewalks, and neighbors knew each other's middle names. Luna had been coming to the bakery since she was 5. When her mother's work schedule changed, and she needed somewhere safe to wait the 30 minutes between when Maria's first job ended and her second one began. Rosa, the bakery owner, had a soft spot for children and an understanding heart that recognized when a family was doing their best with what little they had. She let Luna sit at the small table near the window, where the 8-year-old would do her homework, or read library books while the morning regulars came and went. That's how Luna had noticed James, not because he was wealthy or important, but because he was sad. Children have a radar for emotional weather that adults often lose, and Luna had been watching the well-dressed man in the corner booth with the same careful attention she gave to stray cats and wilted flowers, creatures that needed kindness but didn't know how to ask for it. "My mama works very hard," Luna explained when James finally found his voice and asked her to sit down. Her legs, clad in those carefully patched jeans, swung slightly from the chair that was just a bit too tall for her. "She cleans offices at night and works at the grocery store during the day, but she always makes time to eat breakfast with me before I go to school. She says breakfast is the most important meal because it's when families talk about their dreams for the day." James felt something twist in his chest at the casual way she mentioned dreams, as if they were as normal as weather reports or traffic updates. When had he last had a dream that couldn't be measured in profit margins? When had he last looked forward to anything that didn't have a stock ticker symbol next to it? "What about you?" Luna asked, her dark eyes studying his face with unsettling directness. "What dreams do you talk about at breakfast?" The question should have been easy to deflect. James had spent years perfecting the art of giving non-answers to personal questions, responses that sounded substantial but revealed nothing. But something about Luna's expectant expression, the way she waited with complete attention as if his answer truly mattered, made his usual deflections impossible. "I don't really talk to anyone at breakfast," he admitted, the words feeling strange in his mouth. "I live alone." Luna's eyebrows drew together in concentration, as if she was trying to solve a particularly complex math problem. "But don't you get lonely? Mama says everyone needs someone to share their morning coffee with, or else the day starts off cold." Lonely. The word hung between them like a bridge neither of them was quite ready to cross. James couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked him about loneliness, couldn't remember the last time he had allowed himself to acknowledge that the hollow ache in his chest had a name. From across the bakery, a woman's voice called out, "Luna, honey, we need to get you to school." James looked up to see a woman in her mid-30s approaching their table, her face showing the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from working multiple jobs while raising a child alone. Her uniform suggested she worked at one of the chain stores in the area, and her eyes held the wariness of someone who had learned to be suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true. This had to be Maria, Luna's mother. James could see the family resemblance in their shared dark hair and expressive eyes. But where Luna radiated openness and curiosity, Maria carried herself with the careful guardedness of someone who had been disappointed too many times to trust easily. "Luna," Maria said quietly, "you shouldn't bother the nice man while he's eating." "Oh, she's not bothering me," James said quickly, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "We were just talking about breakfast." Maria's eyes swept over his expensive suit, his Rolex watch, his perfectly groomed appearance, and James saw her expression shift into something like suspicion. He recognized the look. It was the same expression his ex-wife had worn during their divorce proceedings, the look of someone who assumed that wealth automatically meant selfishness. "Come on, Luna," Maria said, extending her hand. "We'll be late." Luna slipped down from her chair obediently, but turned back to James with a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire bakery. "Will you be here tomorrow?" she asked. James nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. "Same time, same table?" "Good," Luna said with the satisfied air of someone who has just solved that complex math problem. "Tomorrow I'll bring you something. Bye." As mother and daughter made their way toward the door, James watched them through the bakery window. Maria knelt down to zip Luna's jacket, tucking a stray curl behind her daughter's ear with infinite tenderness. They walked down the street hand in hand, Luna skipping occasionally to match her mother's longer stride. And James realized he was witnessing something he had forgotten existed. A family that took care of each other. For the first time in 3 years, James Delaney sat in his corner booth and didn't reach for his phone to check the overnight market reports. Instead, he stared at the empty chair where Luna had been sitting and wondered when his own life had become so small that a conversation with an 8-year-old felt like the most meaningful interaction he'd had in months. Outside, Chicago continued its morning symphony of car horns and construction noise. But inside the bakery, something had shifted. The light through the windows seemed warmer, the coffee tasted less bitter, and the silence that usually surrounded James felt less like armor and more like loneliness wearing a disguise. For the first time in longer than he could remember, James Delaney was looking forward to tomorrow. James spent the rest of that Tuesday in a state of distraction that his assistant noticed immediately. During a board meeting about a potential acquisition in the renewable energy sector, he found himself staring out the conference room windows at the streets below, wondering if he could spot Luna walking home from school. When his investment advisor called with news about a significant upturn in his cryptocurrency portfolio, James listened with less than half his usual attention, his mind replaying the conversation in the bakery. That night, alone in his penthouse, he stood at his bedroom window looking down at the city lights and tried to remember the last time he had genuinely looked forward to something that didn't involve profit margins or market fluctuations. The sensation was unfamiliar, like discovering a muscle he had forgotten he possessed. He found himself wondering what Luna might bring him, as she had promised. In his world, gifts usually came with strings attached, expensive dinners that were really business negotiations, charitable donations that were really networking opportunities, thoughtful presents that were really investments in future favors. But Luna was 8 years old and wore patched jeans. Whatever she brought would be something else entirely. The next morning, James arrived at the bakery 15 minutes earlier than usual, though he tried to convince himself it was merely because traffic had been lighter. He ordered his usual black coffee and toast, but found himself glancing toward the door every few minutes, watching for familiar dark curls and bright eyes. Luna appeared at exactly 8 o'clock, practically bouncing through the bakery door with excitement. She waved at Rosa behind the counter, said good morning to Mr. Peterson, who always sat at the table by the coffee machine, and made her way directly to James's corner booth with the confidence of someone on an important mission. "I brought you something," she announced without preamble, sliding into the seat across from him. From her backpack, she pulled out a piece of paper that had been folded carefully into quarters. When she unfolded it and smoothed it on the table between them, James saw that it was a drawing, the kind of artwork that elementary school teachers tape to classroom walls with pride. The drawing showed the interior of a bakery, recognizable by its checkered tablecloths, and the counter, with pastries behind glass. But this wasn't just any bakery. Luna had captured specific details of Rosa's place, down to the mismatched chairs and the way the morning light slanted through the front windows. In the corner booth, she had drawn 2 figures, a man in a dark suit and a little girl with curly hair, sitting across from each other at a small table. Above them, she had written in careful block letters, "Friends at breakfast." James stared at the drawing for a long moment, something tight and complicated happening in his chest. No one had made him artwork in 3 years, not since Emma had stopped creating the crayon masterpieces that Sarah used to hang on their refrigerator like gallery exhibits. This simple piece of construction paper and colored pencils represented something he had forgotten existed. The gift given without expectation, the gesture motivated purely by kindness. "Do you like it?" Luna asked, her voice showing just a trace of the vulnerability that comes with sharing creative work. "It's beautiful," James said, meaning it completely. "Thank you." Luna beamed with satisfaction. "I made it last night after homework. Mama helped me with the letters because I wanted to spell friends right." She paused, studying his face with that unnerving directness. "We are friends, aren't we?" The question was so simply asked, so free of the complicated social calculations that governed James's adult relationships, that it took him a moment to respond. "Friends." When had he last had a friend who wasn't also a business contact, a networking opportunity, or a strategic alliance? When had anyone sought his friendship purely for the pleasure of his company, without considering his net worth or his connections or what he could do for them? "Yes," he said quietly. "I think we are." "Good," Luna said, settling back in her chair with the air of someone who has just concluded successful negotiations. "Now can I ask you something else?" Before James could answer, she continued with the relentless curiosity of childhood. "Why don't you ever smile? I mean, really smile. Not just the polite kind you do when Rosa brings your coffee." The question hit him like cold water. James prided himself on his professional demeanor, his ability to project confidence and control in any situation. To have an 8-year-old see through his carefully maintained facade was both humbling and somehow liberating. "I guess I don't have much to smile about these days," he said, then immediately wondered why he was being so honest with someone he barely knew. Luna considered this seriously. "Mama says when she doesn't feel like smiling, she thinks about 3 good things that happened that day. Even tiny things count. Want to try?" James almost laughed at the simplicity of it, but something in Luna's earnest expression stopped him. "Okay," he said. 3 good things." He thought for a moment, surprised by how difficult it was to identify positive moments in days that usually blurred together in a continuous stream of meetings and phone calls and financial reports. "Well," he began slowly, "a little girl brought me a drawing this morning." "That was pretty good." Luna nodded encouragingly. "That's one. What else?" "My coffee is the perfect temperature today," James said, taking a sip and realizing that for once Rosa had gotten it exactly right. Hot enough to warm him, but not so hot that he had to wait for it to cool. "2!" Luna said. "One more!" James looked around the bakery, at Rosa humming while she arranged fresh muffins in the display case, at the construction workers sharing a newspaper and laughing at something in the sports section, at the morning light painting everything in shades of gold and warmth. The sun is shining through those windows in a way that makes this whole place look like it's glowing. Luna followed his gaze and smiled. "You're right. It does look like magic, doesn't it?" She turned back to him expectantly. "Now try smiling about those 3 things." James felt ridiculous, but something about Luna's concentrated attention made it impossible to refuse. He attempted what he intended to be a polite, minimal upturn of his lips. But as he thought about the drawing, the perfect coffee, and the golden light, something genuine began to happen to his expression. The smile started small, but it grew, reaching his eyes for the first time in longer than he could remember. Luna clapped her hands together in delight. "There! You have a nice smile. You should use it more often." From across the bakery, Maria appeared, and James saw her hesitate when she noticed Luna deep in conversation with him again. Her expression was harder to read this morning, still cautious, but perhaps slightly less suspicious than the day before. "Luna, sweetheart, school time," she called. As Luna gathered her backpack, she looked at James seriously. "You should keep that drawing somewhere you can see it," she said. "And remember about the 3 good things. It works every day, not just today." After they left, James sat in his corner booth holding the drawing and feeling as if something fundamental had shifted in his carefully ordered world. For the 2nd consecutive day, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow with an anticipation that had nothing to do with stock prices or board meetings or any of the metrics by which he usually measured his days. That afternoon, in his office high above Chicago's financial district, James did something unprecedented. He asked his assistant to have the drawing professionally framed. When she looked at him questioningly, after all, it was clearly a child's artwork, not a valuable piece to be preserved. He simply said it was important to him, and left it at that. The frame, when it arrived the next day, was simple but elegant, something that would showcase Luna's work without overwhelming it. James hung it on the wall beside his desk, where he could see it while he worked. His business associates might find it odd, but James discovered he didn't care what they thought. For the first time in years, he had something in his office that made him smile every time he looked at it. The 3 weeks that followed established a new rhythm in James's carefully structured life. Every morning at the bakery became a small adventure, never knowing what Luna might say or ask or observe with her unsettlingly perceptive 8-year-old wisdom. She told him stories about school, about her best friend Sophia, who was missing her 2 front teeth, about the class hamster named Mr. Whiskers, who had learned to escape from his cage. In return, James found himself sharing pieces of his own life that he hadn't talked about in years. He told Luna about his childhood in a small town outside Chicago, where his grandmother taught him to play chess on rainy afternoons. He mentioned his love of old movies, a passion he hadn't indulged since his divorce. He even, in a moment of unguarded honesty, told her about Emma, how much he missed his daughter, and how he wished he knew how to bridge the distance that had grown between them. Luna listened to everything with the intense attention that children give to stories that matter, and her responses were often startlingly wise. When James mentioned feeling like he didn't know how to talk to Emma anymore, Luna suggested he try asking her about her 3 good things each day. When he said he was worried Emma didn't want to spend time with him, Luna pointed out that maybe Emma was worried about the same thing. "Sometimes people who love each other get scared," she said with the matter-of-fact tone she used for obvious truths. "But being scared doesn't mean they don't love each other anymore." Maria, meanwhile, had begun to soften around the edges. She still watched their interactions carefully, but James noticed that her smiles when she collected Luna each morning were becoming more genuine, less formal. One morning, when Luna was particularly excited about a spelling test she had aced, Maria actually lingered at their table for a few minutes, sharing in her daughter's joy. "She talks about you, you know," Maria said quietly while Luna was saying goodbye to Rosa. "Mr. James from the bakery who knows about 3 good things and has the saddest smile she's ever seen." She studied his face carefully. "She has a gift for seeing people who need kindness. I just hope you deserve it." The comment stung, but James understood it. He had given Maria no reason to trust him beyond the fact that her daughter seemed drawn to him, and trust wasn't something that came easily to a single mother working 2 jobs in a world that seemed designed to disappoint her. "I hope I deserve it too," he said honestly. That seemed to surprise Maria. She had been expecting defensiveness or dismissal, not vulnerability. For a moment, her careful guard dropped slightly, and James caught a glimpse of who she might be when she wasn't constantly braced for disappointment. "She's all I have," Maria said simply, and in those 4 words, James heard his own fear reflected back at him. She was afraid of losing the most important person in her world, just as he had lost his. As October moved toward November, James found himself thinking more and more about the family he had lost, and the child who seemed determined to convince him that healing was still possible. He kept Luna's drawing beside his computer at home, and every morning before leaving for the bakery, he made himself identify 3 good things about the day ahead. The exercise, which had seemed almost childishly simple at first, began to change how he saw his days. Instead of focusing on problems to solve and obstacles to overcome, he started noticing moments of beauty and connection that had been there all along, but invisible to his wounded eyes. The way morning light caught the glass towers of downtown Chicago, the satisfaction of a business deal that created jobs for hundreds of people, the fact that somewhere in the city a little girl was probably doing her homework and thinking about their conversation tomorrow, but it was the smile that changed everything. The genuine smile that Luna had coaxed out of him that first morning began to appear more frequently, not just in the bakery, but in his office, in meetings, even during phone calls. His assistant commented that he seemed different, lighter somehow. His business associates noticed that he was more pleasant to work with, more willing to consider creative solutions instead of just crushing obstacles with brute financial force. The truth was that Luna had reminded him of something he thought he had lost forever: the capacity for joy that wasn't dependent on achievement or acquisition or control. She had shown him that happiness could be as simple as a perfectly toasted piece of bread shared with a friend, as easy as noticing sunlight through a window, as accessible as choosing to smile about 3 good things instead of dwelling on 1,000 disappointments. But even as James felt himself beginning to heal, he knew that Maria's trust was fragile, and that his growing attachment to Luna was complicated by realities neither of them had acknowledged. He was a billionaire eating breakfast with a child from a struggling family. He was a grown man finding solace in conversations with an 8-year-old. However innocent and healing their friendship might be, James understood that the world might not see it the way Luna did, as simply friends sharing morning coffee and dreams for the day. That understanding would soon prove prophetic. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning in mid-November when James arrived at the bakery to find Luna's usual table empty. She was always there by 8 o'clock, her backpack neatly placed on the chair beside her, homework spread across the checkered tablecloth as she waited for him to arrive. But this morning, only Maria was there, standing beside the empty table, with an expression that made James's coffee turn to ash in his mouth. "We need to talk," she said without preamble, her voice carrying a coldness that cut through the warm atmosphere of the bakery like winter wind. James approached carefully, recognizing the signs of a conversation that could shatter the fragile peace they had built over the past weeks. "Is Luna okay? Is she sick?" "She's at school," Maria said tersely. "Where she should be every morning, instead of here talking to strange men who want to be friends with little girls." The accusation hit James like a physical blow, mainly because he recognized the kernel of truth in it. How did it look to an outside observer? A wealthy older man, alone and isolated, forming a close friendship with a vulnerable child from a poor family. Even though James knew his intentions were pure, even though every conversation with Luna had been innocent and healing, he could see how suspicious it might appear to someone who didn't understand the context. "Maria, it's not what you think," he began. But she cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Isn't it? Because Mrs. Rodriguez from the grocery store asked me yesterday why I let my daughter spend so much time with the rich man at the bakery. She wanted to know if he was paying me, if I was using Luna somehow." Maria's voice began to rise, attracting attention from other customers. "And you know what I realized? I don't actually know anything about you. Not your last name, not where you live, not why a man who can clearly afford to eat anywhere chooses to have breakfast in this neighborhood every single day." James felt the foundations of his morning sanctuary cracking beneath his feet. "My name is James Delaney," he said quietly. "I live downtown, and I come here because it's the only place where I don't feel completely alone." But Maria was past the point of listening to explanations. "Luna comes home every day talking about Mr. James this and Mr. James that. She draws pictures of you, asks if she can bring you things she's made at school. Yesterday she asked if you might want to come to her birthday party next month." Maria's voice broke slightly. "She's getting attached to you, and I can't afford to let her get hurt when you get bored and disappear." The words struck James like arrows, each one finding its mark. Of course Luna would get attached. Children formed bonds quickly and completely, without the defensive calculations that governed adult relationships. And of course Maria would be afraid of that attachment, having probably watched her daughter be disappointed by other adults who had promised more than they could deliver. "I would never hurt her," James said. But even as he spoke the words, he realized how hollow they sounded. How many adults had said the same thing to children who ended up abandoned anyway? "Maybe not intentionally," Maria conceded, her anger giving way to exhaustion. "But people like you. You move in different circles. You have different priorities. What happens when the novelty wears off? What happens when your real life gets busy and you don't have time for morning conversations with a little girl?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable because James couldn't offer the kind of guarantees that Maria needed to hear. He couldn't promise that his life wouldn't change, couldn't promise that business wouldn't intervene, couldn't promise that he would always be there in the way Luna had come to expect. "I've already lost one person who promised to always be there," James said quietly, thinking of Emma and how his own choices had created distance between them. "I understand why you're scared." But Maria shook her head. "No, you don't understand. When you lose someone, you write a check for therapy or take a vacation, or buy something expensive to make yourself feel better. When we lose someone, we don't eat. We lose apartments. Everything falls apart. She picked up her purse, preparing to leave. I can't let Luna think that adults are safe to love when most of the time we're not. What if I could prove that I'm not going anywhere? James asked desperately. What if I could show you that this isn't just some whim or charity project? Maria paused at the door, her expression softening slightly, but not enough to change her mind. How could you possibly prove something like that? James didn't have an answer, and they both knew it. Trust, real trust, couldn't be purchased or guaranteed with contracts. It had to be earned over time through consistent actions, and time was exactly what Maria was no longer willing to give him. Stay away from her, Maria said finally. Please, she'll forget about you eventually, and it's better if that happens sooner rather than later. After Maria left, James sat alone in his corner booth, staring at the empty chair where Luna usually sat, and feeling as if the bakery had suddenly become unfamiliar territory. The warm golden atmosphere that had sustained him for weeks now felt harsh and artificial. The other customers seemed to be watching him with suspicious eyes, wondering what kind of man formed friendships with other people's children. Rosa approached his table cautiously, coffee pot in hand. More coffee, Mr. Delaney? James looked up sharply, surprised that she knew his last name. Rosa smiled sadly. Luna asked me how to spell it a couple weeks ago. She wanted to make you a birthday card, in case your birthday happened while she knew you. She refilled his cup without being asked. That little girl has a heart bigger than this whole neighborhood. Her mom is just trying to protect it. I know, James said. I don't blame her for being careful. Maybe not, Rosa said. But you should know. Luna's been asking for you every morning this week. Maria tells her you're probably too busy with work, but that child knows something's wrong. She paused, studying his face. Seems to me like you both might be getting your hearts broken over a misunderstanding. After Rosa walked away, James sat in silence, thinking about Luna asking for him, and being told he was too busy with work. It was the story of his life, wasn't it? The people who mattered getting pushed aside by the demands of business, by the endless pursuit of more wealth, more success, more control. He had lost Sarah and Emma the same way, gradually through a series of priorities that seemed reasonable in the moment but added up to abandonment over time. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't losing someone because he had chosen work over love. This time he was losing someone because he had finally learned to love something more than work, and the world couldn't understand how that was possible. James finished his coffee in silence and left the bakery, knowing it might be the last time he ever sat at that corner table. As he walked to his car, he caught a glimpse of Luna through the window of a classroom at the nearby elementary school. She was sitting at a small desk, writing something in a notebook, her dark curls falling across her face as she concentrated. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass, and Luna's face lit up with surprised recognition. She waved enthusiastically, and James waved back, his heart breaking a little more with each second of her innocent joy. He knew that Maria was probably right to keep them apart. He knew that friendships between adults and children were complicated, fraught with potential for misunderstanding and harm. He knew that Luna deserved a world where she could trust adults without reservation, and he wasn't sure he could ever be the kind of adult who was worth that trust. But as he drove away from the neighborhood, where he had discovered friendship and healing, James Delaney made a decision that would have surprised anyone who knew him in his corporate empire. He wasn't going to give up without a fight. Not this time. Not when so much was at stake for both of them. He had spent 3 years learning to live with loss. Now it was time to learn how to fight for love. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of loneliness that felt familiar, yet somehow worse than what James had experienced before meeting Luna. He returned to eating breakfast alone in his penthouse, staring out at Lake Michigan while his coffee grew cold and his toast remained untouched. The view was spectacular, worth millions of dollars in real estate value, but it felt like looking at a painting of a life rather than living one. Work, which had once provided distraction from his emptiness, now felt meaningless in a way that surprised him. During board meetings, he found himself thinking about Luna's 3 good things exercise, wondering what she might find to be grateful for on gray November days when winter was settling over Chicago like a heavy blanket. When his investment advisor called with news about a particularly profitable cryptocurrency transaction involving his Bitcoin holdings, James felt nothing but a vague irritation that money continued to multiply in his accounts, while the things that actually mattered remained out of reach. He drove past the bakery twice during those 2 weeks, slowing down just enough to see if Luna might be there, but the corner booth remained empty. Rosa waved to him once through the window, her expression sympathetic, but James didn't stop. Maria had asked him to stay away, and despite every instinct in his body urging him to fight for the friendship that had begun to heal his wounded soul, he respected her wishes. But Luna's drawing remained framed on his office wall, and every time James looked at it, he remembered what it felt like to smile genuinely, to look forward to simple conversation, to believe that connection was possible even across the vast differences in their circumstances. The drawing had become a talisman, a reminder that for a few brief weeks he had been someone worth befriending. It was during his second sleepless night that James made a decision that would have seemed impossible to him just months earlier. If he couldn't prove his worthiness through words, perhaps he could prove it through actions. If Maria was afraid he would disappear when his real life got busy, perhaps he needed to show her that Luna and her well-being had become part of his real life. James began making phone calls. The first call was to the principal of Luna's elementary school. James had researched the school online and learned that it was overcrowded, underfunded, and struggling to provide basic educational resources for children from low-income families. The building was old, the playground equipment unsafe, the library severely lacking in current books and technology. "Mr. Delaney," the principal said when James explained who he was, "I'm familiar with your work in the business community. How can we help you?" "Actually," James said, "I'm calling to see how I can help you. I understand your school serves a lot of families who are working hard but struggling financially. I'd like to discuss making a donation to support your programs." The conversation that followed was unlike any business negotiation James had ever conducted. Instead of discussing profit margins and return on investment, he found himself asking about reading scores and meal programs and whether the children had adequate winter coats. The principal's surprise gradually gave way to cautious excitement as James outlined his vision: a comprehensive support program that would not just provide money, but ongoing resources and commitment. "This sounds wonderful, Mr. Delaney, but can I ask what prompted your interest in our school specifically?" James hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I have a friend who attends your school, a little girl named Luna Rodriguez. She taught me something important about kindness, and I'd like to honor that lesson." The second call was to his personal lawyer, instructing him to set up a foundation focused on providing educational support and family resources in Luna's neighborhood. The foundation would be permanent, endowed with enough capital to ensure its work would continue, regardless of what happened in James's own life. It would provide scholarships, after-school programs, family counseling, and emergency assistance for families facing financial crises. The third call was the hardest. James dialed the number for Sarah's house, knowing that Emma would be home from school and hoping his ex-wife might allow him a few minutes to talk to their daughter. "James?" Sarah's voice was surprised but not unwelcoming. "Is everything okay?" "I'm fine," James said. "I was wondering if I could talk to Emma for a few minutes, if she's available." There was a pause, then muffled conversation in the background. When Emma's voice came on the line, it was cautious but curious. "Hi, Daddy." "Hi, sweetheart. How was school today?" They talked for nearly an hour, longer than they had talked in months. James asked Emma about her classes, her friends, her favorite books, and for the first time in years, he found himself genuinely interested in her answers rather than simply going through the motions of parental concern. When she mentioned feeling nervous about an upcoming science presentation, James didn't immediately offer to hire a tutor or solve the problem with resources. Instead, he asked her what made her feel brave, what strategies she used when things seemed scary. "Can I tell you something, Emma?" James said as their conversation was winding down. "I've been learning about a game called 3 Good Things. Every day, you try to think of 3 good things that happened, even if they're small. Want to try it with me?" Emma was intrigued by the novelty of her father suggesting a game instead of discussing her grades or activities. Together, they identified 3 good things from her day: successfully completing a difficult math worksheet, finding a lucky penny on the playground, and discovering that the cafeteria was serving her favorite pizza for lunch. "What about you, Daddy? What were your 3 good things?" James thought carefully. "Well, I got to talk to my daughter on the phone and learn about her science project. That's definitely number 1. Emma giggled at this. "I made some plans today to help some kids who need better resources at their school, and—" He looked at Luna's drawing on his wall. "I remembered something important about friendship." When they hung up, James felt something he hadn't experienced in years, hope that he might still have time to build a real relationship with his daughter, and that the principles Luna had taught him about kindness and attention might apply to all the relationships he had damaged through neglect. But the most difficult conversation was still ahead of him. James spent the weekend crafting a letter, not an email or a text message, but an actual handwritten letter on good stationery, the kind of formal communication that couldn't be dismissed or deleted with a casual swipe. He wrote draft after draft, trying to find words that would convey his sincerity without sounding patronizing, his commitment without seeming presumptuous, his love for Luna without crossing boundaries that would make Maria even more uncomfortable. The final version was simple and direct. "Dear Maria and Luna, I know you asked me to stay away, and I have respected that request because I understand your need to protect Luna from adults who might disappoint her. I don't want to cause either of you pain or worry, but I also can't pretend that knowing Luna hasn't changed my life in ways that matter. She taught me how to smile again, how to find good things in ordinary days, how to believe that friendship is possible even when circumstances seem complicated. Those lessons are gifts I will carry with me forever, regardless of what happens next. I'm writing to tell you that I've established a foundation focused on supporting families and children in your neighborhood. Luna's school will receive resources for educational programs. The local community center is getting funding for after-school care, and there will be emergency assistance available for families facing economic hardship. This isn't charity, and it isn't an attempt to buy my way back into your lives. It's simply the right thing to do. Inspired by a little girl who believes the world can be made better through kindness. The foundation will continue its work, whether I ever see Luna again or not. My commitment to this community isn't dependent on personal relationships. It's dependent on the understanding Luna gave me, that we're all connected, and that people who have resources have a responsibility to share them thoughtfully and sustainably. Luna, if your mother allows you to read this letter, I want you to know that our friendship taught me something invaluable, that the best adults are the ones who remember how to see the world through children's eyes, with wonder and hope and the belief that tomorrow can be better than today. Thank you for reminding me of who I wanted to be. I will always remember our mornings at the bakery as some of the happiest of my adult life. With respect and gratitude, James Delaney. James delivered the letter personally, slipping it under the door of Maria and Luna's apartment building on a Sunday evening when he knew they would be home, but wouldn't feel pressured to respond immediately. Then he drove back to his penthouse and waited, unsure whether he had done something wonderful or something that would ensure he never saw Luna again. The response came 3 days later, not in the form of a letter or phone call, but as a small figure standing beside his corner booth at the bakery on Wednesday morning, her backpack on the seat next to her, homework spread across the familiar checkered tablecloth. Luna looked up when James approached, her smile uncertain but hopeful. "Mama says I can have breakfast with you today," she said carefully, "but only if you promise to tell me 3 good things and really mean it." James sat down across from her, his heart fuller than it had been in weeks, and realized that sometimes the greatest miracles come disguised as ordinary Wednesday mornings in neighborhood bakeries where little girls teach millionaires how to remember what wealth actually means. "I promise," he said, and for the first time in his adult life, James Delaney understood that some promises were worth more than all the money in the world. The restoration of their friendship didn't happen overnight, but it happened gradually, carefully, with the kind of intentional building that creates foundations strong enough to weather future storms. Maria remained watchful but not hostile, occasionally joining their conversations when her schedule allowed, slowly beginning to understand that James's interest in Luna stemmed not from loneliness-seeking distraction, but from genuine appreciation for her daughter's remarkable spirit. The foundation James had established began its work within weeks of his letter, and the results were visible throughout the neighborhood. Luna's school received new computers for their library, updated playground equipment, and funding for a reading specialist who could work with children struggling to keep up. The community center started offering free after-school programs where children could do homework, participate in art projects, and receive healthy snacks from families who might not be able to afford proper meals. But perhaps more importantly, James began to understand that his relationship with Luna was part of a larger pattern of healing that needed to happen in his life. The principles she had taught him about attention, presence, genuine interest in other people's well-being were applicable to every relationship he had damaged through years of prioritizing wealth over connection. His conversations with Emma became weekly events that both of them looked forward to. Instead of awkward restaurant visits where they struggled to find common ground, they began taking walks through Chicago's parks, visiting museums, attending movies that Emma chose rather than culturally improving events that James thought would be good for her. When Emma mentioned wanting to learn photography, James didn't hire a professional tutor. Instead, he bought 2 cameras and suggested they learn together, creating a project they could share. The breakthrough came on a Saturday afternoon in December when Emma asked if she could meet Luna. "You talk about her sometimes when we're doing the 3 good things," Emma said. "She sounds really nice, and I've never had a friend who was 8 years old." The meeting, carefully arranged with Maria's permission, took place at the bakery on a Sunday morning, when Rosa served hot chocolate instead of coffee, and the atmosphere felt festive rather than businesslike. Emma, now 10 and beginning to show signs of the young woman she would become, was initially shy around Luna, but Luna's natural warmth quickly dissolved the awkwardness. "Your dad says you're really good at science," Luna said, sharing a chocolate chip muffin with Emma. "I'm not very good at science yet, but I like the experiments." "Maybe I could help you sometime," Emma offered. "My dad says helping people learn things makes you understand them better yourself." James watched his daughter and his young friend bonding over shared homework struggles and favorite books, and realized that Luna had given him something beyond friendship. She had shown him a way back to fatherhood that didn't depend on guilt or obligation, but on genuine care and shared experiences. Sarah, when she came to pick up Emma after their bakery visit, was initially surprised by the whole arrangement. "So this is the famous Luna," she said, shaking the little girl's hand seriously. "Emma tells me you taught her father how to smile." "He just forgot how for a while," Luna said with typical matter-of-fact wisdom. "Sometimes grown-ups forget things that are important, but that doesn't mean they can't learn them again." Sarah shot James a look that was unreadable but not unkind. Later, as they were preparing to leave, she pulled him aside. "Emma says you're different now. She says you ask her questions because you want to know the answers, not because you think you should ask questions." "A wise little girl taught me the difference," James said. "Maybe," Sarah said thoughtfully, "or maybe you were ready to learn the difference, and she just happened to be there to teach you." As winter settled over Chicago in earnest, the morning routine at the bakery became a fixed point around which other good things began to organize themselves. James's business remained successful, perhaps more successful than ever, because his decisions were now guided by a sense of purpose rather than simple profit maximization. He began investing in companies that created jobs in underserved communities, supporting renewable energy projects that would benefit future generations, using his financial influence to encourage other wealthy individuals to consider their obligations to the broader community. But the real transformation was in the quality of his daily life. James's penthouse, while still magnificent, no longer felt like a museum of his isolation. Emma visited regularly, and her presence brought life to rooms that had been silent for too long. He had started cooking again, simple meals that reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen, food that was prepared with attention rather than simply ordered from expensive restaurants. The foundation had evolved beyond his initial conception, becoming a genuine community resource rather than a wealthy man's charity project. Maria had been hired as one of its coordinators, bringing her understanding of what local families actually needed rather than what outsiders assumed they needed. Luna proudly wore the T-shirt from the Foundation's first community carnival, an event that had brought together families from across the neighborhood for an afternoon of games, food, and shared celebration. "You know what I love most about this?" Luna said one morning in late January as they sat at their familiar table watching snow fall past the bakery windows. "It's not just about the money or the programs or the stuff. It's about people taking care of each other." James nodded, thinking about how the foundation had created connections that went far beyond financial assistance. Families were watching each other's children, sharing resources, forming support networks that would persist long after any individual donation had been spent. "You're right," he said. "The best help helps people help each other." "Exactly," Luna said, delighted that he understood. "Like how you helped Emma learn to smile more, and then she helped me with my science project, and now she's teaching other kids about photography at the community center." She took a sip of her hot chocolate. "It's like throwing a rock in a pond. The ripples keep going and going." But the metaphor was perfect, and James stored it away as another piece of wisdom from his 8-year-old teacher. Luna's influence on his life had indeed created ripples that continued to expand, touching relationships and decisions and ways of being in the world that he was still discovering. But perhaps the most significant change was internal. The frozen clocks in James's penthouse had begun ticking again, not because he had them repaired, but because time itself felt different now. Instead of something to be endured or maximized or controlled, time had become something to be shared, experienced, valued for the moments of connection it made possible. The photograph albums that had gathered dust for 3 years were back on his coffee table, and James found himself adding new pictures. Luna and Emma building a snowman in Grant Park, Maria laughing at something Rosa had said during a community meeting, Sarah smiling at their daughter's latest artistic creation. These weren't the formal portraits of his previous life, but candid moments that captured genuine happiness rather than the appearance of success. One evening in February, as James was reviewing financial reports in his study, Emma called without prompting, something that had never happened before their relationship began to heal. "Dad," she said, "I wanted to tell you my 3 good things from today, but I actually have 4. Is that allowed?" James smiled, setting aside the portfolio analysis he had been reviewing. "I think 4 good things is even better than 3. As Emma recounted her day, a successful presentation at school, a compliment from a friend, a funny story her mother had told her, and the excitement of planning Luna's upcoming birthday party, James realized that the healing in his life had reached a place he had thought would be forever damaged. His relationship with his daughter was becoming something real and reciprocal, built on mutual affection rather than duty or guilt. "You sound happy, Emma," he said when she finished. "I am happy," she said simply. "Are you happy, Dad?" The question would have been impossible to answer honestly 6 months earlier, but now James discovered that the answer came without hesitation. "Yes, sweetheart, I am." After they hung up, James sat in his study looking at Luna's framed drawing and thinking about the unexpected pathways that had led him from the depths of isolation to something that could only be called gratitude. Tomorrow was Luna's 9th birthday, and James had planned a small celebration at the bakery. Nothing elaborate or expensive, just cake and presents, and the presence of people who cared about each other. For the first time in years, James Delaney was looking forward to a party. Luna's 9th birthday party became the kind of memory that people carry with them for decades, not because it was elaborate or expensive, but because it captured a moment when love took precedence over everything else. The bakery was decorated with streamers and balloons. Rosa had made a special chocolate cake with 9 candles, and the guest list included everyone who had become part of their extended family: Emma, Sarah, Maria, several of Luna's classmates, and even Mr. Peterson, the elderly man who had become the unofficial mayor of their morning table. James had agonized over Luna's gift, rejecting expensive toys and gadgets in favor of something that reflected their friendship. He finally settled on a leather-bound journal with blank pages, along with a set of colored pencils in every shade imaginable. On the first page, he had written, "For Luna, who taught me that the most important stories are the ones we write with kindness. May your pages always be filled with wonder." When Luna opened the gift, her eyes lit up with the particular joy that comes from receiving something that feels perfectly chosen. "This is for writing down the good things," she said immediately, "and for drawing pictures of them, too." "Exactly," James said. "I thought you might want to keep track of all the good things you help other people notice." The party was small but filled with the kind of laughter that makes a space feel larger than it actually is. Emma helped Luna blow out her candles, making a wish that she whispered seriously into the birthday girl's ear. Sarah chatted with Maria about their daughter's friendship, and James found himself in the unfamiliar but pleasant position of being surrounded by people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. But it was during the cleanup, as they were folding tablecloths and gathering wrapping paper, that Luna approached James with the serious expression she wore when something important needed to be discussed. "Mr. James," she said, "I need to tell you something." James knelt down so they were at eye level. "What is it, Luna?" "I've been thinking about friendship and about grown-ups and about why Mama was scared for me to be friends with you." Luna's voice was thoughtful, choosing words carefully. "And I think I understand now. It's not because you were bad or because I was in danger. It's because grown-ups sometimes make promises they can't keep, and that hurts kids more than grown-ups realize." James nodded, struck by her insight. "That's very wise, Luna. But I also think," Luna continued, "that some promises are worth the risk, like the promise to try to be kind, or the promise to remember that friendship matters more than being busy all the time." She paused, studying his face. "Are those promises you can keep?" The question was asked with such sincerity that James felt the weight of it settle in his chest. Luna wasn't asking for guarantees about the future. She was asking whether he had learned something fundamental about priorities and relationships. She was asking whether he had truly changed, or whether the changes were temporary adjustments that would fade when life became challenging again. "Yes," James said quietly. "Those are promises I can keep." Luna smiled and hugged him, but James knew the embrace was also a kind of test. If he failed to keep those promises, if he reverted to his old patterns of letting success override connection, Luna would remember this moment. She would understand that he had made a conscious choice to disappoint her, and that disappointment would be harder to forgive than any accidental hurt. As winter moved toward spring, James had multiple opportunities to prove whether his transformation was genuine. A major acquisition opportunity arose that would have required him to travel extensively for several months, missing Emma's science fair, Luna's school play, and the regular breakfast conversations that had become the foundation of his emotional stability. The old James would have taken the deal without hesitation, assuming that family and friends would understand that business sometimes required sacrifice. But this James turned down the acquisition, referring it to a colleague and taking a smaller but less disruptive investment position instead. When his board questioned the decision, James explained that he had other commitments that were more important than maximizing short-term profits. Some of the board members seemed puzzled by this reasoning, but James discovered he didn't care what they thought about his priorities. The science fair was a success. Emma's project on renewable energy earned second place and a proud father who understood every word of her presentation. Luna's school play, a production of Charlotte's Web, where she played a thoroughly convincing sheep, was attended by an audience that included not just Maria but James, Emma, Sarah, and Rosa, all of whom cheered enthusiastically during the curtain call. And the breakfast conversations continued, evolving as Luna grew and as their friendship deepened into something that could weather changes and challenges because it was built on genuine mutual affection rather than need or circumstance. By Emma's 11th birthday in April, the two girls had become genuine friends despite their age difference, bonding over shared jokes and art projects and the kind of secrets that only children understand. Emma's birthday party was held at the community center that James's foundation supported, and Luna was in charge of organizing games for the younger children who attended. "Look at them," Sarah said, standing beside James as they watched Emma and Luna leading a group of kids in an elaborate version of freeze dance. A year ago, Emma barely talked to other children. Now she's teaching leadership skills to 8-year-olds. James nodded, thinking about how Luna's influence had rippled through all their lives. "Luna has a gift for bringing out the best in people," he said. "So do you, it seems," Sarah said quietly. "Emma tells me you've been teaching photography classes at the community center. She says you're really good with the kids." It was true. James had begun volunteering regularly, using his interest in photography as a way to connect with children who reminded him of Emma and Luna, bright, curious kids who needed adults to pay attention to their questions and ideas. The work was more satisfying than any business deal he had ever closed, and the children's progress gave him a sense of accomplishment that didn't depend on profit margins or market performance. "They teach me more than I teach them," James admitted. "They haven't learned yet that some things are supposed to be impossible." As spring became summer, James realized that a full year had passed since Luna first approached his table at the bakery and asked why he ate alone. The anniversary felt significant, worthy of recognition, so he suggested a picnic in Grant Park to celebrate what Luna had begun calling their friendship birthday. The picnic included their entire extended family: Maria, Emma, Sarah, Rosa, who closed the bakery early to join them, and several of the children from the community center who had become part of their irregular but intimate social circle. They spread blankets under oak trees, shared sandwiches and fruit, and spent the afternoon playing games that ranged from sophisticated chess matches to enthusiastic rounds of tag. As the sun began to set, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and orange, Luna approached James with her journal, the leather-bound book he had given her for her birthday, now filled with dozens of pages of good things, drawings, stories, and observations about the world around her. "I want to read you something," she said, settling beside him on the blanket. She opened to a page near the back of the journal and began to read in her clear, serious voice. "Today I learned that the best friendships are the ones that make everyone happier. Mr. James used to eat alone and be sad, but now he eats with friends and smiles real smiles. Emma used to be shy, but now she teaches other kids about cameras and science. Mama used to worry all the time, but now she laughs more and believes that good things can happen. And me. I used to think that grown-ups were too busy to care about kids' ideas, but now I know that some grown-ups just forgot how to listen, and when they remember, they become the best friends of all." Luna closed the journal and looked at James seriously. "I wrote that yesterday, but I wanted you to hear it because I think it's important for grown-ups to know when they're doing good things, not just when they're making mistakes." James felt tears gathering in his eyes, not tears of sadness, but tears of gratitude for the extraordinary gift of being seen, understood, and appreciated by someone whose opinion mattered more to him than any professional accolade or financial milestone he had ever achieved. "Thank you, Luna," he said. "That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said about me." As they packed up the picnic and prepared to head home, James looked around at the group of people who had become his chosen family and realized that Luna had given him something even more valuable than friendship. She had given him a template for how to live a life guided by love rather than fear, how to make decisions based on connection rather than control, how to find meaning in simple moments rather than grand achievements. The little girl who had asked why he ate alone had taught him that the answer wasn't to find someone to eat with, it was to become someone worth eating with. And in learning that lesson, James Delaney had finally found his way home. 2 years later, on a crisp October morning that reminded James of the day he had first met Luna, he sat at their familiar corner table in the bakery. But this time, he wasn't alone. Emma, now 13 and growing into the kind of young woman who noticed when others needed kindness, was doing homework across from him. Luna, 11 and beginning her last year at the elementary school, was sharing hot chocolate and plans for the community center's Halloween carnival. But today was special for another reason. Sarah had called the night before with news that would have seemed impossible during the darkest days of James's isolation. She was getting remarried to a man who appreciated her strength and made her laugh, and she wanted James to know before Emma heard it from anyone else. "How do you feel about that?" Emma had asked him during their conversation the previous evening, her voice careful with the kind of emotional intelligence that children develop when they've watched adults handle difficult transitions with grace. "I feel happy for your mother," James had said, realizing with surprise that he meant it completely. "She deserves someone who will love her the way she deserves to be loved." "And I can still see you just as much as I want to," Emma had added, not quite a question. "As much as we both want to," James had confirmed. "That won't change." Now, sitting in the bakery with Emma and Luna, James reflected on how profoundly his understanding of love and loss had evolved. The jealousy and resentment that had once characterized his feelings about Sarah had been replaced by genuine affection and respect. Their marriage had ended, but their connection as co-parents had grown stronger, built on shared commitment to Emma's happiness rather than unresolved romantic feelings. "Mr. James," Luna said, interrupting his thoughts, "you have that look you get when you're thinking about complicated grown-up things." James smiled. "You know me too well, Luna." "So what are your 3 good things today?" she asked, employing the ritual that had become such a natural part of their relationship that they barely remembered its origins. James considered carefully. "Well, I'm having breakfast with 2 of my favorite people in the world. That's definitely one." Both girls grinned at being included in this category. Emma got an A on her history project about women's suffrage, which she worked really hard on, and he paused, looking around the bakery that had become so much more than a restaurant to him. "I woke up this morning looking forward to today, instead of just trying to get through it." "That's a really good one," Luna said approvingly. "Emma, what about you?" "I finished the book Luna recommended, and it was actually really good even though I thought it might be too young for me," Emma said. "My mom sounded really happy when she called last night, and—" she grinned mischievously. "I get to spend Saturday helping Luna teach art classes to the little kids at the community center, which means I get to be the responsible older kid for once." "My turn," Luna said. "I gotta have breakfast with my friends just like every week. The art project I've been working on for the Halloween carnival is finally finished, and it looks exactly like I imagined it would. And—" she became more serious. "I realized something important yesterday that I want to tell you both." "What's that?" James asked. "I realized that friendship isn't about needing someone or them needing you. It's about choosing each other even when you don't have to," Luna said with the kind of wisdom that continued to amaze the adults in her life. "Like, Mr. James, you could eat breakfast anywhere, but you choose to eat it with me. And Emma, you could hang out with kids your own age, but you choose to spend time with me too. And that makes it special, not because anyone has to do it, but because everyone wants to do it." James and Emma exchanged glances, both struck by Luna's insight into the voluntary nature of love that makes it meaningful. "You're absolutely right," James said. "The people we choose to spend time with become our family, whether we're related to them or not." As they finished breakfast and prepared to leave for their respective schools and offices, James realized that Luna's observation had perfectly captured what made their relationship so precious. He had spent years thinking of love as something that could be lost or taken away, something fragile that required constant protection. But Luna had shown him that the strongest love is the kind that exists because people actively choose it, day after day, in small moments and ordinary conversations and quiet gestures of care. Outside the bakery, as they prepared to go their separate ways, Emma hugged Luna goodbye and then turned to James. "Dad," she said, "I'm really glad you learned how to be friends with kids again. It makes you a better dad, too." The comment was casual, offered without expectation of a profound response, but it struck James as a perfect summary of his transformation. He hadn't set out to become a better father when he met Luna. He had simply been a lonely man looking for connection. But in learning to see the world through a child's eyes again, he had rediscovered parts of himself that made all his relationships richer and more authentic. After Emma left for school and Luna headed to her own classes, James sat for a few extra minutes in his car outside the bakery, thinking about the letter he had received the previous week from the Foundation's board of directors. The organization had grown beyond his wildest expectations, supporting not just Luna's neighborhood but similar communities across Chicago and beyond. Other wealthy individuals had been inspired to create their own foundations, and a network of mutual support had developed that was creating real, sustainable change in the lives of families who had previously felt forgotten by society. But the letter hadn't been about money or programs or measurable outcomes. It had been about something more intangible and more important. The way the Foundation's work had created a culture of caring that extended far beyond any individual initiative. Families were supporting each other. Children were mentoring younger children. Adults were volunteering their time and skills to help neighbors they might never have noticed before. "What you've created," the letter had concluded, "isn't just a foundation. It's a reminder that community is built one relationship at a time, one conversation at a time, one moment of genuine attention at a time. You've shown people that wealth isn't just about what you can buy. It's about what you can make possible for others." James folded the letter and put it away, but its message stayed with him as he drove to his office. Wealth, he had learned, was indeed about possibility, but not in the way he had always assumed. True wealth wasn't the ability to buy whatever you wanted. It was the ability to create conditions where other people could flourish, where children could dream bigger, where families could feel secure enough to be generous with each other. His business continued to prosper, but now his investment decisions were guided by questions Luna might ask. Will this create jobs for people who need them? Will this make communities stronger? Will this help children have better futures? The answers weren't always compatible with maximum profit, but they were always compatible with sleeping peacefully at night and looking forward to breakfast conversations with friends who valued his character more than his portfolio. That evening, James stood at his penthouse windows, looking out over the Chicago skyline and thinking about the journey that had brought him from the frozen clocks and silent rooms of 3 years ago to the warm, living space his home had become. The penthouse still retained its magnificent views and luxurious amenities, but it now also contained Emma's artwork on the refrigerator, Luna's drawings framed on the walls, and the comfortable chaos that comes from a life actively shared with people who matter. Tomorrow was Friday, which meant breakfast with Luna and then an afternoon supervising photography classes at the community center. Saturday, Emma would join them for the art classes Luna was teaching to younger children. Sunday, he might have dinner with Sarah and her fiancé, a relationship that had evolved into genuine friendship based on their shared love for Emma and mutual respect for each other's growth. It was a schedule that would have seemed impossibly domestic and small-scale to the man he had been before meeting Luna. That James had measured success in acquisitions and market dominance, in the ability to control outcomes and accumulate assets that existed primarily on paper and in accounts he rarely thought about in human terms. But this, James understood that the most valuable assets couldn't be measured in dollars or euros or Bitcoin valuations. They were measured in moments of connection, in the trust of children who believed adults would keep their promises, in friendships that survived changes and challenges because they were built on genuine care rather than convenience or need. As he prepared for bed, James looked at Luna's latest drawing, which now held a place of honor on his bedroom wall. It showed the bakery on a sunny morning, filled with people of all ages, sitting at tables, talking and laughing, and sharing meals together. Above the scene, Luna had written in her careful handwriting, "This is what happiness looks like." She was right, James realized. Happiness wasn't a destination you reached after achieving certain milestones or accumulating sufficient resources. It was a way of being in the world that recognized the extraordinary value of ordinary moments, the sacred nature of simple kindness, the profound wealth that comes from being genuinely known and appreciated by people whose opinion matters because their love is freely given. James Delaney, billionaire, philanthropist, father, friend, fell asleep that night with a smile on his face, looking forward to tomorrow's conversation about 3 good things with an 11-year-old girl who had taught him that the most important question in life wasn't, "How much can I achieve?" but, "How much can I love?" And in the quiet of his beautiful home, surrounded by the evidence of relationships that had transformed from broken or non-existent into sources of joy and meaning, all the clocks finally ticked in harmony, measuring not the passage of time that had to be endured or maximized, but time that was fully lived and deeply appreciated. The years that followed confirmed what James had learned from Luna. That transformation isn't a destination, but an ongoing commitment to choosing love over fear, connection over control, presence over productivity. Emma graduated from high school with honors and plans to study social work, inspired by the community development she had witnessed through the Foundation's work. Luna became a teenager with all the complexity that implies, but never lost her fundamental kindness or her ability to see the best possibilities in every situation. Maria found love with a man who appreciated both her strength and her daughter's wisdom, creating an expanded family that included James and Emma as honorary members. Sarah and her husband welcomed a son, giving Emma a little brother she adored, and James the surprising joy of being a grandfather figure who could offer support without the primary responsibility that had overwhelmed him as a younger father. Through it all, the bakery remained their touchstone, the place where friendship had first bloomed between an isolated millionaire and a wise little girl, where conversations about 3 good things had taught them all how to notice the extraordinary in the ordinary, where the rhythm of shared mornings had created a foundation strong enough to support all the changes and challenges that life continued to offer. And you? Have you ever met someone small who changed your life in immeasurable ways? Perhaps a child whose questions made you reconsider everything you thought you knew about success and happiness. Maybe a stranger whose kindness reminded you of possibilities you had forgotten existed, or even a moment of unexpected connection that opened your heart to ways of loving you hadn't considered before. These encounters happen more often than we realize, but only when we're present enough to notice them, vulnerable enough to receive them, and brave enough to let them change us. James learned that true wealth isn't what you can buy with money. It's what you can build with attention, patience, and the willingness to believe that tomorrow can be better than today if we choose to make it so. Tell me your story in the comments below. Share the moment when someone unexpected taught you something essential about what matters most. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we can continue sharing these reminders that the greatest miracles often come disguised as ordinary conversations, and that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important truths. Because in a world that often feels cold and disconnected, stories like James and Luna's remind us that friendship is still possible, that generosity creates its own rewards, and that the simple act of asking someone, "Why do you eat alone?" might be the beginning of healing you didn't even know you needed. Thank you for listening, and may your own breakfast conversations be filled with 3 good things and the kind of friendship that makes every day worth celebrating.